Grothman from Wisconsin to give us his Q&A and remarks for 5 minutes.
Sure. Are we talking about revenue? I sometimes like to call it taxes because the people back home might not know what revenue means. But in any event, in the last, say, 6 years, when we talk about these tax cuts being the problem, what has happened to revenues in real terms in the last, say, 5, 6 years?
In nominal terms, revenue has increased.
Okay. Do you know about, Mr. Mark, you know about how much?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to do, we have to focus on what the right metrics are. Things are going to go up in nominal terms because of inflation.
Well, that's why I ask in real terms.
Right, right. And real is after inflation, so I'm not sure they've gone up after inflation. But the bottom line is this. I think if we focus on as a percentage of GDP, revenues as a percentage of GDP, spending as a percentage of GDP, debt as a percentage of GDP, that's a metric that I think provides a fuller and fairer view of where we are, where we're headed. And the truth is, right now, debt to GDP is too high. It's getting ready to go a lot higher. Secondly, we're taxing at about the same level of GDP as post-World War II average. We're spending well above the post-World War II average, in part because of Medicare and, Medicaid or whatever. And so the bottom line is by definition, revenues are going to go up if the economy grows and if you have inflation. So the real issue is, what is it as a percentage of GDP? And that means the problem is primarily a spending problem, but not solely.
Okay. Next comment. I was in one of these meetings the other day. It kind of surprised me. Sometimes people say it's apparent people on this side of the aisle feel we have to raise the tax on the wealthy. Since the last tax cuts, do anyone of you guys know what percent overall of our revenue is coming from the, quote, wealthy?
I don't know, Congressman. The CBO does annual analyses of this, but they tend to lag by a few years. So I don't know the most recent years.
It's
but
gone
I think,
up.
Congressman, the issue here is that the share of income accruing to the wealthy has gone up probably over that period. And so as Dave Walker noted, when the economy grows, then revenue will grow. And also, if more income moves into upper tax brackets, then more revenue will be collected relative to GDP. That's right. That doesn't mean that that's a result of the 2017 Tax Act, nor that the gains in jobs that Congressman Smucker mentioned
a good case can be made that it is, because as people become more productive, the amount of taxes they pay goes up. Mr. Couchman, when I came to Congress in 2015, Congress spent $1.1 trillion in discretionary spending. Last year we spent $1.7 trillion, a 54% increase. And discretionary spending is largely not the type of spending that's going up because people are older, right? You don't have Medicare in there, you don't have Social Security in there. You want to comment on that 54% increase?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is an awful lot of wasteful spending in the discretionary accounts. Between those two periods you mentioned, the percent of GDP for discretionary spending is about the same. But that's something that at least Congress looks at on a sustained basis every single year. The rest of the budget, the other 74% of spending and the 100% of revenue doesn't get that same kind of detailed treatment and review and ability to change things.
A problem we always have in any government based on elections is politicians are always going to try to buy votes every 2 years. And therefore, I would think the vast majority of governments around the world, if they're in countries based on elections, are going to see the size of their government grow. Ms. Baccia, do you want to comment on what you think are maybe some countries in the Western world in which it pays politicians to increase the spending, some ways in which other countries have maybe solved this problem or gone away towards solving the problem?
Yeah, and to your previous question, the top 10% of income earners pay about 70% of our income tax burden. So we already tax the wealthy very heavily. In fact, the United States has one of the most progressive tax systems in the world. The countries that I mentioned earlier in my testimony, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, and really most of the European countries tax their middle-class taxpayers at much, much higher rates, often in the form of value-added or consumption taxes. And that's really what it would take for the United States to be able to get closer to covering its fiscal gap. Is you cannot just raise taxes on the wealthy. There's not enough money at the very top. My colleagues Adam Michel and Brian Riedel at the Manhattan Institute have calculated this numerous times in various forms. So if we're talking about just relying on revenue increases to close our fiscal gap, we need to be honest with the American people that we're talking about significant, steep middle-class tax hikes. And I haven't seen members of Congress on either side of the aisle propose a serious plan that would do that, and it's not a plan that I would recommend. So in terms of what I would recommend is that if you look at those countries, Germany, Switzerland, and Sweden, is that what they have in common is a bipartisan commitment to fiscal sustainability, regardless of our differences on the margins, which programs one party prefers over another, how much we think we should tax the wealthy versus other Americans. We can reconcile all those differences if we're willing to come to the table, and we can agree on that shared goal that we should not be financing our spending on the backs of working Americans in the future and younger Americans who are not even able to
The
vote
gentleman's
yet.
time has expired.
Thank you.
We will now move to our friend from California, Mr. Jimmy Panetta, for 5